Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining Delaware's Resilient and Sustainable Communities League, or RASCL, for our 5th annual summit. Our theme this year is Go for the Green, funding and designing resilient infrastructure, and we are all aware of the importance of funding. These next 2 days are going to be full of new ideas, advice, and motivation to really go for that green. My name is Nicole Marks, and I'm a NOAA Coastal Management Fellow placed at the Delaware Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control in the Division of Climate, Coastal, and Energy, which is a founding member of RASCL. I'm also a member of the RASCL Outreach and Events Committee. I'm honored to host this virtual summit and want to thank the RASCL Steering Committee and our Outreach and Events Committee for all their hard work and for hosting such an exciting list of panelists this year. For those of you that are not familiar with RASCL, we're a collaborative network whose mission is to support all Delaware communities in taking the necessary actions to thrive in the face of changing environmental conditions through collaboration, information sharing, and technical assistance. RASCL has been actively working to meet its mission by establishing 4 new committees in addition to the pre-existing steering and outreach and events committees to accomplish the goals and objectives in the 2021 to 2025 strategic plan. These committees include the Community Assistance Committee, the Hazards and Preparedness Committee, the Science and Research Liaison Committee, and the Resilient Project Implementation Committee. It's important to note some recent endeavors by these committees. So for those who are interested, the Resilient Project Implementation Committee recently launched the Project Guidance Group, which is a new service being offered to Delaware communities needing technical assistance and advice to initiate or complete resilience-related projects. This group offers advisory and technical assistance from RASCL-affiliated experts. The deadline for this round of applications is December 15th. So for more information and to apply, please visit the website on the screen, and that will also be posted in the chat box. We're also excited to announce that we're currently discussing an upcoming RASCL coffee hour with DENREC's Climate Action Plan team. The date of the coffee hour has not been finalized, but details will be forthcoming. We will also be holding our RASCL members winter meeting in the winter of 2022. Stay tuned for our official announcements soon. So before we get into our session, I'd like to take a moment for technology and housekeeping so we can keep things rolling smoothly throughout the discussion. So please keep your audio on mute and turn off your video camera for the duration of the event. If you'd like, you can rename yourself on the screen. It'll help identify you and your affiliation to others. So to do that, use the ellipses at the top right of your video box. During the video, we have moderators designated in the chat box. So when you have questions for presenters, we ask that you use the chat box and send them to our questions moderator. For help with technical issues, you can chat directly with our technical support moderator. Helping to make today's event possible are our sponsors. At the bronze level, RASCL would like to thank the Delaware chapter of the American Planning Association, the Nature Conservancy, AECOM, the University of Maryland Environmental Finance Center, and the professional architects and engineers at GBM. We couldn't hold this summit without our sponsors, so thank you. We are very excited that over 180 people have registered for the 2021 RASCL Summit this year. As you can see, we've got a lot of folks joining us from different sectors today. And specifically, we have a lot of representation from state, county, and local governments, as well as universities, the private sector, and general members of the community. So this afternoon session is the first of 3 summit webinars titled the Grant Funders Q&A. So we'll have several short presentations followed by a moderated question and answer panel. We will conclude today's webinar at 3:30 p.m. So as you can see, the remaining webinars will be held tomorrow, with the first starting at 10:30 a.m. and the second starting at 3 p.m. Additionally, there will be a happy hour in our virtual Wonder Me room immediately after tomorrow's final webinar. We really hope you will join us for some networking there. Please remember to use the Zoom links provided for each individual webinar, as they're all different from one another. A few last things to note before I introduce our moderator. Professional PE and AICP credits are available at each of our webinars. Today's live session is going to be recorded and made available on our website. We're also going to follow up with each of you to share resources referenced during the summit, share contact information for our speakers and attendees, and send you an all-important feedback survey so you can tell us how we can improve for next year. With that, I'd like to introduce our moderator for this session. Mike Bilstrup is a planner for the DENREC Division of Parks and Recreation and a member of the RASCL Outreach and Events Committee. Mike, the panel is all yours.
Thank you, Nicole. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to see the great turnout for our 5th annual RASCL Summit and our second, hopefully last, fully virtual event. A little bit about my background. My name is Mike Bilstrup. I'm a former RASCL Steering Committee member. I have a master's in public administration from what is now the Biden School of Public Policy and Administration at the University of Delaware. And I'm a certified planner with the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. I began my career with DENREC in the Division of Climate, Coastal, and Energy. And today I'm a recreation planner with the Delaware State Parks, where I manage the Outdoor Recreation Parks and Trails Grant Program. For today's session, our panelists will each have about 12 minutes to present. And as Nicole mentioned, if you have questions, we're going to save those to the end and after all speakers have gone. But please feel free to type those questions in as they come to the Q&A boxes where you'll be able to enter those. I do hope you'll take a few minutes to look at the full event program on our RASCL website, that's derascl.org/summit. That'll give you a full overview of the speakers that we have today. With that, I'd like to introduce you to our lineup of distinguished speakers. From right to left, I have Mr. Michael Hahn, Planning Supervisor with the Delaware Department of Transportation. Ms. Jen Atkins is Director of Clean Water Supply with the American Rivers. Ms. Kate Frangos is the Project Officer and Data Analyst for the Mitigation Division with the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Ms. Rachel Dawson is the Program Director for the Delaware River with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. The 4 of them represent agencies and organizations that award and administer grants to communities. We hope that you'll get a sense of the similarities and differences from their perspective to help you better navigate the grant process. However, our first speaker, Ms. Carolyn Burnt, is the Legislative Director for Sustainability in the Federal Advocacy Department at the National League of Cities. While not a funding agency, Carolyn will talk about the American Rescue Plan Act and ways our municipalities can utilize ARPA funding to support resiliency and sustainability. Carolyn leads NLC's advocacy, regulatory, and policy efforts on energy and environmental issues. Some of those topics include water infrastructure and financing, water and air quality, climate change, energy efficiency, brownfields, solid and hazardous waste, and many more. Carolyn serves on the board of directors at PACE Nation, a national nonprofit whose mission is to promote property assessed clean energy, or PACE, financing. She is also a member of the Cary Institute Forest Pest Advisory Committee, helping to inform policy to reduce the importation of insect pests and diseases into the U.S. through international trade. Carolyn, before I hand it over to you, as an icebreaker, I would please ask you to share an interesting holiday gift or on your Christmas list or someone's list that's close to you.
Yes, thanks, Mike. Pleased to be here with you and everyone. On my holiday list this year, I have wallpaper. I am going to be undertaking a mini bathroom renovation, and so hope to put up some new wallpaper.
Awesome, thank you. The floor is yours.
Okay, great. Let's see. This looks okay to you? Okay. So the National League of Cities is the voice of America's cities, towns, and villages, representing more than 200 million people. We work with 49 state municipal leagues, including the Delaware League of Local Governments, and we serve as a resource and advocate for 19,000 cities, towns, and villages across the country. At least 50% of our membership is considered a small city with a population under 50,000. And let me say, I'm going to talk quickly through a bunch of slides, but I know that they will be shared out at the end. There are a lot of links to specific resources in here, so those are good for you for following up, and also happy to take any questions at the end. Our mission is to strengthen local leadership, influence federal policy, and to drive innovative solutions. During an unprecedented time, NLC delivered unprecedented results for our members, and that's $65 billion in direct aid to every city, town, and village through the American Rescue Plan Act. But the work isn't done, and we are committed to providing our members with the resources, information they need to help their communities recover and rebuild. If you're an NLC member, thank you. If you are not, I would encourage you to learn about our benefits and how NLC can support you as a leader in your community. So what is the American Rescue Plan Act? It's a recovery package that was signed into law in March of this year with 1.9 trillion of programming for emergency stabilization and economic recovery. I'm going to be talking mostly about the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, which is $350 billion for states, municipalities, counties, tribes, and territories. This is non-competitive funding. Every local jurisdiction is entitled to funding. And I think the important thing here is that this program can be used to address and assess the immediate needs in your community. And then you can take some time and look of your community needs and how best to prioritize the remaining funds. So I'm going to talk specifically, here's a quick overview actually of the eligible uses for the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund. And I'm going to talk specifically about the water and sewer infrastructure category. And I should mention that there's also specific ineligible uses of this funds. So that's premium pay for telework, payments into pension funds, rainy day funds, financial reserves, or outstanding debt, and payment for federal match requirements if explicitly prohibited. So within the infrastructure eligible expenditure, the American Rescue Plan Act allows the funds to be used for necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband. And this slide demonstrates the eligible uses for both water and sewer. Treasury's interim rule provides flexibility for many projects that improve access to clean drinking water and improve wastewater and stormwater systems. The rule aligns eligible projects with those allowed under the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds. These are programs that hopefully you are familiar with. For the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, there are 11 project categories that are eligible, as you can kind of see on the slide here, some general categories. And for the Drinking Water SRF, there are 6 project categories. And I should note that planning and design for capital projects and water quality planning that is likely to result in a capital project are eligible under both of the SRF programs. The approach of aligning with the EPA State Revolving Fund programs is meant to support an expedited project delivery. But at the same time, the Treasury interim final rule is intended to preserve flexibility for local governments to direct funding to their own particular needs and priorities without having to go through your state. And ultimately, it's the local government that makes the determination whether the project is eligible. The Treasury guidance also mentions 3 other areas for water and sewer projects. First, cybersecurity needs to protect water or sewer infrastructure, such as developing effective cybersecurity practices and measures at drinking water systems and publicly owned treatment works. Green infrastructure investments and projects that address the impacts of climate change or improve resilience to climate change. This could include rain gardens, measures to conserve and reuse water, or reduce the energy consumption of public water treatment facilities. And it's also important to note that stormwater projects must have a water quality benefit. And finally, projects to address lead service lines. So I wanted to give a few examples of actual projects that have used both the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds. So you can see here a couple of examples from Delaware, but also wanted to highlight some across the country. So you have projects like addressing flooding in Wilmington by replacing the combined sewer system with a separate sanitary sewer system. This reduced flooding in neighborhoods and sewer overflows. It also was cleaning up a brownfield site and turning that into a wetland park. You have another example here in Florida, which is a small rural community of less than 6,000. And it installed solar facilities at the wastewater treatment plant to provide the energy needs for that for that treatment plant. On the drinking water side, you have a couple of projects here about wells and contaminated drinking water. So first, building a new well and transmission line to improve the water treatment configuration that was really old, been in place since the 1930s and contaminated with MTBE, which is an organic compound that causes unpleasant taste and odor in the drinking water. And also another project that dealt with the nitrate contamination in drinking water and constructing a new reverse osmosis treatment plant to address this contamination. So as you can see, just a wide variety of eligible uses here for both of these funds. Next, I just want to share a few resources. And again, you'll have these slides and all of these are direct links. But most important is our COVID recovery hub at nlc.org/recovery. This has links to all of our blogs, fact sheets, and webinars. We also have a local action tracker, so you can see how communities across the country are using their ARPA funds and can search by keywords. A couple of fact sheets I want to mention specifically. First, a guidance paper on how you can use ARPA funds to connect children to nature through green schoolyards and other examples. And two fact sheets on the clean water and drinking water state revolving funds, including project examples related to climate resilience and links to other resources. We're also going to be working on a fact sheet for all the ways that you can address sustainability and climate resilience with ARPA through the state and local fiscal recovery fund. That should be out in a few weeks. And of course, you can visit the Treasury site if you have specific information. One thing I want to mention before I move on is on the drinking water, clean water and drinking water state revolving funds. The links on this slide will take you to the guidance for each of those SRFs. And that is a great way for you to find out if your specific project is eligible. They're kind of long documents, and I always say, just do a word search for your project and see how that fits in within the EPA guidance document. But remember, as long as your project is eligible as kind of described in these guidance documents, the project, you can use your ARPA funds for it. You don't need specific approval from EPA or your state. Okay, so I want to switch gears here and highlight a few opportunities around water and climate resilience from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This bill passed in November, and NLC leadership was in attendance at the White House when it was signed. So these are a few key programs, and I want to mention again that there is additional funding through each of the clean water and drinking water state revolving funds. This is over 5-year spending, and all of these programs are over 5-year spending, and it's in addition to the regular appropriations process that Congress is still working on. So for example, FY22. The allocations for each of this has gone out to your state, but it has not been broken down into each of these bucket areas that I'm going to talk about, just that top line number. So first, again, you have the 2 programs for the drinking water state revolving fund. Those are the traditional programs. There's additional money for lead pipe replacement projects, and that will flow through the drinking water state revolving fund. 49% of that funding will go out as principal forgiveness or grants. 51% will be those loans. And $10 billion in grants for PFAS and other drinking water contamination. That money will be split through both the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, as well as additional funding through the state, but not through the SRF program. What's forthcoming on Build Back Better Act? We have some grant programs. So again, with lead pipe replacement and a few others that I know are of interest to local governments, particularly the sewer overflow and stormwater management. Still waiting for Congress to pass this bill. just a few things I want to highlight here on infrastructure. I know Kate will talk about some of these programs probably on strengthening infrastructure against extreme weather events. But I do want to highlight here under the third bullet where it says energy efficiency and conservation block grant. That is money that will flow from the Department of Energy to communities 35,000 or above for energy efficiency, renewable energy projects. If you're under 35,000, that money will flow through your state for you. Finally, we have an infrastructure bill tracker here where we are highlighting all of the infrastructure programs that are important to cities where you can apply directly. This is a member-only dashboard, but it is searchable by agency and by program area. And finally, some blogs to learn more about what is in the infrastructure bill, both generally and by program area. And of course, if you have any questions, you can feel free to get in touch or happy to take them again at the end. So thank you for that.
All right, thank you. Let me make sure I'm off mute. Yes, okay. Thanks, Carolyn. I'm going to move on to our next speaker. Mrs. Rachel Dawson is the program director for the Delaware River with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. Rachel manages a growing $13 million fund for habitat and water quality restoration projects in the Delaware River watershed. She's responsible for program development and fundraising, partner and collaborator coordination, and regional investment strategy and planning. Previously, she was the legislative representative for the water restoration team at the National Wildlife Federation, where she advocated on behalf of clean water laws, policies, and programs for large-scale ecosystem restoration, and a policy analyst at the Northeast Midwest Institute, focusing on issues in the watersheds of the Mid-Atlantic, including the Delaware River Basin. Rachel, I'm going to hand off to you, but don't forget your icebreaker about your gift for your holiday list.
Sure, thanks. Very glad to be here today. And I guess my gift wish list is that Santa would bring me an actual vacation this year. Would be really nice to have. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if this looks all right. Okay, can you see the wood duck? Awesome. Okay. So I have a couple of screens going here, so I'm going to try to look in the right spot, but you guys are all down here. So, so I'm Rachel Dawson. I'm the program director for the Delaware River at the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. I'm actually representing today several different programs. I'm going to touch on 4 current funding opportunities at the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. So I'm kind of channeling my colleagues today. So if I can't respond to any specific questions, be happy to follow up with anybody who has those. But I'm going to kick it off specifically with my program. So the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund is the first one I want to talk to you about today. And obviously this is covering about 2/3 of the state of Delaware. So very much relevant to the work that a lot of folks are doing in Delaware. So to give you an idea of the program and to give you kind of the overview of everything today, in the amount of time that I have, I won't be able to get into too many of the weeds and the details. So we do have links to every one of our programs listed here. So I do encourage everyone to head to our website to take a look at those programs, dig into the details, and then obviously send us any questions that you have. We'd be happy to answer them specifically about your projects or the ideas that you're working on or anything else you'd want to explore. And I do want to underscore that this is a really important and exciting time for the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. We have a lot of resources coming online right now for specifically for this kind of work, for infrastructure, for resilience, for nature-based solutions. So we really want to encourage folks to take a look at our programs that are available and reach out if you have any questions about how to apply for those. So I will start with the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund. This is the program that I run in coordination with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This program started in 2018 as a partnership with Fish and Wildlife Service in an attempt to conserve fish and wildlife habitat, restore natural resources, and to also connect communities with nature. So the goal here is really broad, a lot of opportunity there in the priorities. But it is specifically geared toward that fish and wildlife habitat restoration at its core. We released our request for proposals in early February. It's open for about 8 weeks, and we have our proposals due in very early April. And then we will go through our review process and make our awards in August, typically. And then we start that cycle all over again in the new year. So we're currently working on our 2022 RFP. And in this 2022 RFP, we do expect to have between $10 and $15 million available in grant funding. And those grants will range somewhere between $75,000 upwards to $1.5 million, which is a new cap this year. So we're increasing the cap on those. Our program does require a one-to-one non-federal match, but we do encourage folks to take a look at the details and specifics there, because some things are a little bit different, and there are some opportunities there to have some wiggle room with that. Back in 2017, the Fish and Wildlife Service brought together a lot of partners in the watershed to create a framework for improving fish and wildlife habitat. That framework has 4 strategic program areas. Those are habitat improvement, water quality, water quantity, flooding and flow issues, and connecting people with nature, so recreational access. So those 4 big pillars are really the kinds of things we're looking for projects in the Delaware watershed. Also, really important for this program and for all the other programs I'll talk to you about today, there is a strong pivot for our work to encourage direct community engagements. We're really looking for applicants, for grantees, to be directly engaging impacted communities, work with them in partnership, and to have a lot of considerations for diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in their projects. We provide a lot of resources on those and a lot of direction, so we encourage you to take a look at our materials and reach out with any questions you might have about that. Moving on to the next. NIFWF also administers our National Coastal Resilience Fund, and this is not my program, so I'm going to channel my colleagues here on this one. This is a very large program that we have at NIFWF. We're expected in 2022 to have about $138 million available. There is no cap on those, so projects can be pretty large. And you can see here that there are about 4 primary categories of fundable activities. Those range from some initial design, initial permitting, program or project development, all the way down to implementation, and then eventually to monitoring. So it runs the full spectrum of program and project delivery. So we suggest taking a look at those categories to see where you might fall in the life of a project, and see what category might be appropriate for a project you might have in mind. The RFP is set to come out in March of 2022. This is a pre-proposal process, so there's a little bit of that first step, a smaller 2-page pre-proposal that'll go in April, and then it will go through our typical reward process. Full proposals will be invited after that, and then awards will be made in November. With respect to match for this program, it is unclear at the moment exactly what the match requirement will be, but that will be available when the RFP comes out next year. But for this program and for all programs at the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, we do encourage applicants to be very strategic about partnerships and have strong partnerships with a lot of expertise that they can leverage. And so working with your federal, state, and local agency partners, also with your communities that are impacted, that's really key to a strong proposal in this program and in all of our other programs. Listed here are a couple of the evaluation criteria for this program. You can kind of see the things that the reviewers will be looking for strong proposals, for things that really stand out. I think a lot of this can be distilled down to the idea that the project is rooted in the community, in the partnership, in regional and local plans, that can meet a lot of needs, and is cost effective, and is a very good partnership. So a strong team leading the way and implementing that project. Kind of a cousin to the NCRF is the ECRF. So this is an Emergency Coastal Resilience Fund. This is a new program for this year. This program came online with the intention to address some of the emergency situations that we had across the country, from major storm events in our coastal areas, but also wildfires on the West Coast. So these projects are intended to not only address the damage that was caused, but also to enhance resilience and for communities to be able to better manage going forward. The emphasis on this program, in contrast to the NCRF, is that this is much more about shovel-ready projects, projects that are ready to go on the ground. Some planning and some development will be considered, but much more about getting those restoration and conservation projects done, and to enhance community resilience on the ground. The RFP is now currently open on our website, and in fact, the webinar for applicants is at 3 o'clock today. So maybe you could jump on a little late if you're interested in learning more. It will be posted to our website later so you can catch up. The eligible projects for this program definitely need to be in the green area on this map that's shown here. So a good part of the state of Delaware is eligible for this program. And there is no match requirement for these funds. So that's a really great opportunity for folks to get a project done quickly. And due to the emergency nature of the funds, there was a decision that was made to try to get expedited project delivery. And lastly, I will touch on our Chesapeake Bay Stewardship Fund. So this program covers the other third of the state of Delaware, where my program doesn't. So there are 3 major categories of work for the Chesapeake Bay program. The major takeaway here is that most of these projects, if not all of these projects, need to address water quality as their primary concern. So if you have a resilience or infrastructure project or something that you're looking for that also has a major water quality component that happens to be in the Chesapeake Bay footprint, this might be something you'd want to take a look at. There are different buckets here that are available for projects, from collaborative work, from working together in groups to get larger scale work done, to small projects, over to planning and technical assistance opportunities. So it kind of runs the gamut. There are different requirements, different funding award sizes, and different kinds of eligibility components to each one of these. So this is one you would want to kind of take a look at the RFP when it comes out. They kind of stagger those two. So the next opportunity for these will, I believe the INSR program is open now, and then the other 2 programs will be open next spring. So encourage folks to take a look at those. And I think that is all of mine. And I'd be happy to answer any questions folks might have about those, but definitely take a look at the links, check out our website, and we're always happy to answer questions. So please do feel free to reach out.
Hey, Mike, you were muted, just so you know.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate your presentation and taking some questions here at the end. So we're going to move on to our next speaker, Ms. Kate Frangos. She's a project officer and data analyst for the mitigation division with FEMA. Kate is a member of the non-disaster hazard mitigation assistance team in FEMA's Region 3 mitigation division, serving as a project officer for Delaware, the District of Columbia, and West Virginia, and the HMA branch data analyst. Prior to joining FEMA, Kate was associate planner in the Office of Economic and Community Development at the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, where she researched the transit accessibility of the region's tourism industry, supported the development of the region's comprehensive economic development strategy, and helped administer the Classic Towns program. I'm going to hand it off to you, Kate, if you want to go ahead and give us your icebreaker gift, and then the floor is yours.
And I'm talking on mute. It's popular today. I'm doing it all day long. My icebreaker is not actually from this year. It's from years past. I came up with this for my niece several years ago, and it's now my go-to gift for little kids of a fort kit of basically you go get a bunch of you can either use chip clips or they have towel clips for the beach. You get them, you put it in a Rubbermaid container and you decorate it, and they can make blanket forts wherever they want. Easy, simple, go to.
Nice. That's gonna be a big
Beyond
day.
that, I would also like a real vacation, like Rachel. Okay, so I am going to talk to you about our mitigation assistance programs that we offer through FEMA. I primarily work with our non-disaster programs. I'm also going to include some of our information about our primary disaster program as well, but I'm going to speed through that a little bit. And like everyone else, there's more information in these slides than I'm going to talk about, but you will have access to them at the end. So our goals for hazard mitigation, we define hazard mitigation as any sustainable action that reduces or eliminates long-term risks to people and property for future disasters. We strongly believe in mitigation planning and that it breaks the cycle of disaster damage, reconstruction, and repeat damage. Hazard mitigation includes long-term solutions that reduce the impact of disasters in the future. Our primary goals are reducing vulnerability of communities to disasters and their effects, promoting individual and community safety and their ability to adapt to changing conditions, and withstanding and rapidly recovering from disruption due to emergencies or resilience. And resulting in, we want to have safer communities that are less reliant on external financial assistance. All of the programs that I'm going to talk about today, basically in order to receive funding, we do require that whatever project you're putting forward, if it's a physical project, it does actually have to either reduce or eliminate the risk from a particular hazard in the area. We don't fund things like deferred maintenance, which is the thing that comes up a lot, which there can occasionally be a fine line on projects, and we know that. But if you have questions as to what side of the line something falls on, call us and send me an email. We'll figure it out. So we also, like Rachel, require our projects to be cost effective. And as mentioned in our first presentation, I am going to talk about a couple of those things included in the infrastructure bill, which we're very happy about. We got funding boosts. Our three main programs, the first two are non-disaster. One is our flood mitigation assistance. The second one is our BRIC program, building resilient infrastructure in communities. And the third is hazard mitigation grant program. FMA is a competitive grant program that provides funding to states, local communities, tribes, and territories. The funds can be used for projects to reduce or eliminate risk of repetitive flooding damage to buildings that are insured by the NFIP program. If you participate in this program, if you want to apply under this program as a sub-applicant, you do need to be a participant in the National Flood Insurance Program. You can't be on probation or suspended. And all the structures in the project area must be insured under NFIP before, during, and after this particular project. This program is funded through an annual congressional appropriation, and for FY21, we have $160 million available. Like you see on the screen, up to $10 million of that is for project scoping, in case. So just so you know, we like to fund project scoping. You don't need to have a big giant project for us out of the gate. We want to be able to help you figure out something that's going to work for your community. Up to $70 million is allocated for community flood mitigation projects, and at least $80 million, and whatever, if there's any balance of the first two, goes in a descending order to technical assistance, flood hazard mitigation planning, and individual flood mitigation projects. Individual flood mitigation projects go down to the individual house, either buyout, acquisition demo, or elevation level. So that is an option if you have repetitive or severe repetitive loss projects in your homes in your community. This program is actually going to have an increase in funding over the next couple of years due to the infrastructure bill. I think it's something kind of crazy for us, around $700 million a year, which is a lot of money, and we haven't entirely figured out what we're going to do with it all yet. But that was a pleasant surprise. So there is a cost share with this. The standard cost share across all of our HMA programs is 75-25 split, with 75 being the federal share. For FMA, if you have a repetitive loss property, we bump it down to 90-10, and severe repetitive loss properties, there is no cost share. It's 100% federal. For our building For our BRIC program, this is going to be, we are about to go into our second year. We are currently in the middle of making our awards for our first year, which was FY20. So the BRIC priorities is to mitigate risk to public infrastructure, sort of go incentivizing resilient investments to disadvantaged communities, what some people are calling, it's formerly known as Executive Order 1408. It's the Justice 40 program. Both BRIC and FMA were selected by the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, or the WEJAC, which is a fun acronym, to be two of the initial 21 government-wide programs for the rollout of this. FMA has chosen to focus on one metric for vulnerability to measure within their program, which is the SVI data out of the CDC. BRIC has taken a more holistic approach, which is very cool, also a little scary if you're a reviewer like me, of if you can demonstrate that your community in some way is disadvantaged and you can back that up with data and explain it to us well in a way that we understand, we are going to give you that benefit within the scoring of this program. So it's extremely cool on an EJ level. Makes me very excited. You do have to mitigate risk to one or more community lifelines. This tends to scare a lot of people, but basically lifelines are things you already think about, like communications, roads, bridges, transpo, emergency services, water, food, housing. It's just organized into different categories. We also like it when you incorporate nature-based solutions. There are extra points in the scoring system for this. We want enhanced climate resilience and adaptation, and we do incentivize the adoption and enforcement of the latest published edition of building codes because we find that they make the sturdiest buildings. And if you can have a project that meets multiple of these priorities, all the better. So this program is actually not an annual appropriation from Congress. It's actually, the funding is based on a 6% set aside from the major disaster declarations. So unfortunately, our amount of money we have annually is variable based on how terrible the disasters were the prior year, which is a little morbid, but we're going with it. Last year, we had $500 million to play with. This year, we have $1 billion available total. Every state and territory has an automatic allocation of up to $1 million that they can ask for projects. Planning related activities can be used for up to $500,000 for this. So just the state of Delaware can ask for up to $1 million non-competitively. Community, what we call CNCB projects, capability and capacity building, also can go under here. Tribal set aside, which unfortunately does not apply in the state of Delaware because you guys do have tribes, you just do not have any federally recognized tribes. And then the big one that tends to get most of the attention under BRIC is there is the national competition, which we're estimating will be around $919 million this year. And you can apply for up to $50 million Fed share for each sub application. And we encourage you to come on down. It is very competitive, though. I am going to throw that out there. It is not an automatic ask, which upset some people last year. BRIC is basically to encourage communities to develop creative, impactful, and innovative projects that make a significant impact on their community resilience. This does have a standard 75-25 split, unless you are what the Stafford Act, which is our guiding legislation, refers to as an economically disadvantaged rural community, and then the split is 90-10. I am not going to talk a whole lot about our HMGP program because it is our disaster program. Basically, what happens is after funding is available after a major disaster declaration, and it's based on it's based on a percentage of the estimated federal assistance provided. There are at least one active disaster in the state of Delaware right now. And you guys are small enough usually that, at least off the top of my head, usually more than one county is impacted. So you can go in under this, and you guys also, there's a subshoot of this called HMGP COVID, based off a percentage of your federal funding that you guys got from us for COVID relief for the COVID response. There's around, I believe, $7 million that's allocated that, and that's statewide. So if you guys have any questions about that, email me, I will point you in the right direction. This, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about. It's going to go over who can apply. Basically, applicants themselves, you guys need to apply through DEMA, the Delaware Emergency Management Agency, which hopefully I got their acronym correct. I never actually spell it all out. So they are going to put in as the applicant, you need to apply to them. BRIC and FMA are cyclical. Every January, the end of January is when the state's application to us is due. They have a deadline before that. And they do like us to emphasize that you can't come rolling into them the last week of January. They get very cranky. But sub applications can be state agencies, local communities, federally recognized tribes. Don't have an option yet for private nonprofit under BRIC and FMA. That's a topic for future discussion. And this goes through all of the eligible projects. So core application requirements of what we want, and even though the format for applications between the disaster and the non-disaster programs are a little different, all of these elements are required. We do require you to be cost effective. We need cost estimates, cost shares. We do phased projects. So even if you don't have everything nailed down up front, we do accommodate that. We need a scope of work, main thing out of the gate. As a reviewer, I need a scope of work that I know what you're asking for and what the problem is, which is a larger problem than you'd expect. So that's very simple, but it's very important. We do also have to comply with all relevant federal planning and historic preservation laws. So there will be a review on all physical projects like that. And we do look for how effective it is and the technical feasibility. It sort of outlines a general way of the application process. And now I'm going to talk about a couple projects that we have funded in the past with HMA funding. One is, they're sort of two sides of the same coin. One is very small and one is very large, which is why I like this example. This is a rain garden reserve in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio, that was finished in 2008. The total cost under our HMA program, HMGP program, was around $157,000. They bought out 4 houses that were repetitive. I don't know if they're repetitive or severe repetitive loss, but so they used the open space to create a 24,000 square foot municipal rain garden, and it receives drainage for around 3.15 acres, and it can hold over 30,000 gallons of water. It's got walking paths, solar lights, so it's rec and mitigation, which we like combining useful things that are also attractive in your neighborhood. And actually this project funded their match through $50,000 worth of donated materials. And I believe last time we checked, it was around $700 a year in ongoing maintenance, which is not nothing, but it's very reasonable in the scale of these things. On the other end of the world is a project that is still under construction in Hoboken, New Jersey, which is the Northwest Resiliency Park, which is a monster in the best way. This thing, when it is done, I believe we are nearing the end of construction finally. It's a $50 million project. It got $10 million in FEMA pre-disaster mitigation funding, which is the precursor program to BRIC. The city of Hoboken put up the rest, and so did the county. They began property acquisition in 2016. This thing is, as you can see, over a city block. When it's done, it's going to be able to manage at least 1 million gallons of stormwater runoff in the area, which is very cool, and serve as a massive recreational area for the neighborhood, which is always a good thing in my book. I don't have fun pictures yet because they are still in the scoping stage, but 2 of Region 3, which Delaware is part of, was very lucky. There were 22 competitive brick projects selected last year. 3 of them were in our region, which is, we outperformed. One of them is in Maryland, down in Baltimore. They are going to be doing a living shoreline on the middle branch of the Patapsco River, which I never pronounced correctly and apologize for. But doing a network of vegetated berms, living shoreline, restored wetlands and aquatic habitat and public space enhancements. And it's also going to increase the resiliency, at least in phase 1, to an energy production plant and a hospital. That's around $32 million worth of Fed share. There's a blue-green stormwater infrastructure project that we're funding down in Southwest DC for around $19 million to hopefully, with bioretention system and porous pavement and a whole bunch of other stuff, be able to mitigate the runoff and street flooding during storm events there. It also occurs at the intersection of the MS4 and the combined sewer system. So trying to alleviate some of the burden on that, on the legacy CSO system. And there was also a project in DC that we're funding, which is a microgrid for a hospital campus that includes their emergency management communication center. But we also fund little tiny projects too. So I like the scale. This has a bunch of,
so if you can wrap it up, we're good.
We've got one more. Here is a bunch of links with resources, and if you need anything or have any questions or are just curious, contact me.
Great, thank you. A lot of information there. But yeah, I'm sure we'll have some questions following up. And I did see that there was a comment from our local Delaware Emergency Management Agency, Josh Kelly, posted the contact information there for Delaware. Our next speaker is Ms. Jen Atkins, Director of the Clean Water Supply with American Rivers. Jen joined American Rivers in July 2020 to lead the Mid-Atlantic Clean Water Supply Team in protecting and restoring clean water in 2 priority river systems, the Delaware River Watershed and the rivers of the Chesapeake. Prior to that, she served as the Executive Director of the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary, a nonprofit organization and national estuary program connecting people, science, and nature for a healthy Delaware River and Bay. Jen has also held positions at the Nature Conservancy, the Land Trust Alliance, and Brandywine Conservancy. And a career focused on rivers and building strong organizations, partnerships, and plans to protect them. She enjoys leading creative and collaborative conservation efforts and building effective and productive working relationships with partners, large and small, across sectors to pursue common goals. I will hand it over to you, Jen, and don't forget your icebreaker.
Thanks, Mike. I'm going to make sure I can share my screen first. Everybody seeing that? Okay.
Looks good.
Okay, great. So icebreaker, I have to say the first thing that came to my mind was alpaca socks. Last year I toured an alpaca farm, an interesting outdoor COVID safe activity, and got a pair of socks there that I just love. So since then I've been on the lookout for alpaca socks, and I bought some as gifts for other people, but I would also love to give any if there's anyone out there who is among my Christmas gift group. So
awesome,
yeah,
thank you.
That's mine. So yeah, I am here today to talk about some grant opportunities that are available that fall under the purview of the Water Infrastructure Advisory Council in Delaware. So I did want to say that, you know, per my introduction, I do work for American Rivers, but I'm really here talking on behalf of the Water Infrastructure Advisory Council. So I'm an appointed member of the council, as are a number of other folks. And so I do bring my American Rivers role into that, but today I'm really talking about a series of programs that's overseen by the council and administered, importantly, by DENRAC. So the council works really closely with DENRAC on all of the programs that I'll be talking about. But before I do that, I did want to just say a quick word about American Rivers. We are a national nonprofit organization, and we're focused on protecting wild rivers, restoring damaged rivers, and also conserving clean water for people and nature everywhere. And it's this conserving clean water piece that is the focus of the Clean Water Supply Program. So the program I'm involved in is really focused on that. And we do a lot of advocating for the funding at the federal level that comes down into the programs that I'll be talking about. So this is a little bit of our connection and the bigger picture of these programs. And when we do that, we have a particular focus on trying to advance natural infrastructure. Obviously, our thing is rivers, so we want to see as much water pollution as possible being addressed and reduced, ideally through natural infrastructure like trees and river corridors and riparian areas and things like that, but also increasingly water equity. And so we think about making sure that everyone has access to clean water, everyone benefits from the water infrastructure investments that are being made, and that they help provide resilience for everyone. So that's a big focus for us in this work. So that being said, I wanted to start with, I know Carolyn already talked a little bit about the SRF programs, and I'm certainly not going to go into any detail on those, but they are critical for thinking about the grant programs that I'll be talking about. The role of the Water Infrastructure Advisory Council is to provide guidance and oversight for the programs, for a series of programs that are meant to help fund and finance water infrastructure. And the state revolving fund programs are really the foundational programs for all of that work. So like all states, Delaware has 2 of these revolving fund programs, or SRF. One is dedicated to drinking water infrastructure, one is dedicated to clean water infrastructure. And the federal government allocates funds for each of these, as we heard already a little bit about. And then Delaware puts some of its own funding into those pots as well. And then DENREC works with the Department of Health and Social Services to then provide these funds to local communities in a variety of ways. And most of those ways involve loans. So by and large, the SRF programs are loan programs, and that's what keeps them revolving, is that the loans go out and then the money comes back and then they can be recycled and used for other things. However, with the way these programs are set up, they do create some opportunities for grants. And so that's what I'm going to talk about here today. I'm not going to talk about the loan programs. I'm going to try and focus on the grant programs. And there are a number of different grant programs associated with the council. So I'm going to focus on a couple of them that I think are particularly relevant for looking at resilience. I will note along those lines that there are some other grants, including planning advances, asset management grants, septic elimination grants, that I'm not going to talk about today. So if you're interested in those, certainly reach out to DENREC or reach out to me and be happy to provide more information about those. But one of the types of grants that I did want to talk a little bit about are planning matching grants. So as part of the state's program, there are 3 different types of planning matching grants that are offered. There are ones that focus on drinking water infrastructure, ones that focus on wastewater infrastructure, and ones that focus on surface water infrastructure. And so every year, a certain amount of money is allocated to each of these programs. These are all, there's a good reason that they're called planning matching grants. They're all for planning. They're meant to just cover the cost of planning design. They do not cover construction or implementation, and they are matching grants in that they require 1-to-1 match. So it's expected that the applicant will provide half the costs for all of these grants. They each have their own sets of application materials. So I'm not going to go through the details of those applications, but those are all available through DENREC, and they each are a little bit different, but they're all set up as these planning grants, and they're all matching grants as well. So for the drinking water infrastructure ones and the wastewater infrastructure ones, those are really good opportunities for municipalities or utilities who operate wastewater and drinking water systems to use these for their planning, potentially to make sure that they're planning for resilience. So that's one of the main ways that I think that these could be used for resilience, is to make sure that resilience is part of how we're planning for these major water systems, whether it's on the drinking water side or on the wastewater side. But I think for the purposes of today, I'm going to focus a little bit more on the surface water planning matching grants, because these are the ones that are really most appropriate for stormwater management planning. So these are the ones that communities would look to use for planning for stormwater. So as I mentioned, they do require a 1-to-1 match. All of these planning matching grants are, the applicants are really, the main applicants are local governments, and in some cases utilities. So these are not grants that everyone is eligible for. Nonprofit organizations and other types of organizations are not necessarily eligible. However, nonprofit organizations can partner with local governments and utilities on these grants, and that's highly encouraged. So the applicant needs to provide the match. These are generally relatively small grants. So the grant could be for up to $50,000. So with a $50,000 match, that's a $100,000 project. And the applications for these are accepted on an ongoing basis by DENREC. So at any point in time, you could submit an application for one of these. And generally this year there is upward of $250,000 that's allocated every year. The council approves a new allocation from the state towards these matching grants, and it's usually within that realm. Actually, I think we have a little bit more than 250,000 this year for these because of some funds that were carried over. So these are a good source of funds for things like retrofitting stormwater systems, for planning for green infrastructure practices, for restoring streams and wetlands. They can be used for small watershed studies, and for stormwater, surface water and drainage plans would be the kinds of things that would be, you'd use one of these grants for. The other type of grant that I want to talk in a little bit more detail about is a community water quality improvement grant. So the planning matching grants that are there, those are mainly aimed towards local governments and utilities. The community water quality grants are mainly aimed towards nonprofit organizations, community organizations, HOAs, other types of organizations that that might not have the same capabilities around match, or certainly wouldn't have the ability to have maybe the kind of revenue stream that you need for a loan. I should mention that the planning matching grants, one of their aims is to plan for a project that would eventually come back to council for a loan. So a much bigger project that would require a loan. So they're mainly aimed towards entities that have the kind of revenue streams that allow them to take advantage of loans. Whereas the community water quality improvement grants are aimed towards organizations that might not have those kinds of revenue streams, that wouldn't necessarily be eligible for a loan. So important things to note about these grants is that they are aimed at water quality improvement. They want to see innovative and sustainable water quality improvement projects. Also, importantly, they need to be directed towards impaired watersheds. And DNREC has a lot of information available on what those watersheds are and information on that. Unfortunately, in Delaware, most of our watersheds are impaired, so it's a fairly long list that we're working at from. And they need to be projects that are helping to implement a watershed management plan. So again, could be a watershed management plan for a specific stream or watershed. It could be one of the comprehensive management plans for the estuary programs that are in Delaware, but it needs to be something that's working towards implementing a larger plan. Other important things is that these, as I mentioned, these are grants that aim to provide funding to nonprofits and other kinds of organizations. The grants themselves and the process is administered by DNREC through the non-point source program. The Water Infrastructure Advisory Council's role is that they get reviewed and approved by council, but really DNREC is the one that takes the applications, puts out the RFPs, the notices about when it's time to apply and so forth. So for these community water quality improvement grants, in the past, there has been a small match requirement. Currently, there is no match requirement. So now is a very good time to apply if you're an organization thinking about one of these. And even when there is a match, it's generally smaller than the planning matching grants. It's usually about 25%. But at this point, there is no match currently. There are applications are taken at specific times. There are usually one, maybe 2 times when DNREC takes applications for this. The last solicitation went out in August for applications due in September. The next solicitation will be going out in January. So if you're interested in one of these grants, keep an eye out. Make sure that you're on the on DNREC's radar screen. Jim Sullivan is the person at DNREC that administers these. And again, you can reach out to me if you want more information about that. But so there is going to be a solicitation coming up. We did spend some time this year trying to improve the application process to really make it clearer and cleaner and hopefully easier for folks to understand and apply for to get applications in. And like I said, all of I did put the specific websites on some of these slides, but the thing to remember is to go to the DNREC environmental finance page. On that page, there are links to all the different grant programs. So if you can just think about DNREC environmental finance, that's where you need to get to find all the information. And like I said, each of the programs has a very specific application process that you can take a look at. The last thing I just wanted to say was that there are some major changes in the works. Some folks have already mentioned some of the things that I wanted to be sure to mention. There is a lot happening right now with water infrastructure. Carolyn talked about ARPA funding. I think someone else mentioned about the infrastructure funding bill that is going to be coming down the pike. And all of these, in addition to last year, earlier this year, our legislature passed the Clean Water for Delaware Act, and the governor signed that over the summer. That is going to have implications on both the structure of the Water Infrastructure Advisory Council, and also could on some of these programs. We don't know yet. Denmark is in the process right now of making some of the changes needed under that act, including a new oversight committee that's being developed with high-level representation from all of the agency heads to weigh in on this, and also some changes to council, a strategic plan for water. So all of that is in the works right now. And there are going to be public meetings for this coming up. So I would urge anyone who's interested in funding for water infrastructure, that's a good way to weigh in on what those programs are going to look like moving forward. The new federal infrastructure funding that's coming out does have significantly more funding for the SRF programs. Whether or not that will translate into new funding for these specific grant programs, we don't know yet. And I would say the same thing about ARPA funds. The state does have ARPA funds. They can be used. A lot of them are meant to be used for water infrastructure. If and how that's going to implement or influence the grant programs I just talked about, we hope that that will be a good thing, but we just don't know yet. So we may be seeing some changes coming down the pike. But the infrastructure funding that is coming, water infrastructure funding coming to Delaware from the latest numbers that I have seen is in the realm of $63 million. So it's going to be a lot of new funding between that and the Clean Water for Delaware Act. And so it's a really good time for folks who are just learning about the SRF programs and these grant programs to get keyed into the activities of the Water Infrastructure Advisory Council and what's going to be happening with the Clean Water for Delaware Act and all of these other things. So it's a really exciting kind of time for water infrastructure funding right now. I think that's it for all I had. If there are questions right now, I'm happy to take them, but I know we have time for questions and answers coming up. So.
Great, thanks, Jen. Again, a lot of information there, a lot of changes coming. That looks like it's going to be some opportunities there. So I'm glad you're able to share that with us. Thank you. For our last panelist, Mr. Michael Hahn, Planning Supervisor with the Delaware Department of Transportation. Mike has been with the Delaware Department of Transportation, or DelDOT, for over 30 years and has focused on environmental, NEPA compliance, and project development coordination. He has supported the agency's outreach and coordination needs on many monumental transportation projects, too lengthy to list. He provided oversight for the Delaware Byways Program, has been involved in local projects, maintenance, and historic preservation throughout the state. He has also experience in parks and recreation planning as well as in administrative operations. Mike now serves as the planning supervisor in local systems planning under the Transportation Alternatives Program. Mike has been a certified planner at the ICP since 1996 and currently has a seat on the executive committee of the Delaware chapter of American Planning Association. Mike, I'm going to hand it to you, but don't forget your icebreaker.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I guess I'm the very last speaker here to kind of bring it up. So the one aspect that I'd like to include as a Christmas gift, of course, Mike, I got to think about you and state parks. Of course, is a 2022 park pass, not just for me and my better half, but it usually goes in the stocking stuffer for my dog. So it's really his Christmas gift. Nice. So, all right, with that being said, let me talk a little bit about DelDOT, Department of Transportation. I presume it probably needs no introduction about who we are, at least from the audience that's participating. But we're the Department of Transportation. I myself in the planning section undertake this Transportation Alternatives Program, TAP program, which I'm going to talk to you about. So basically, here's my outline for you all. What you will learn or hear. What is TAP? What is the TAP project? and I say TAP, Transportation Alternatives Program, again, how to apply and who is eligible, the project development process, examples of TAP that best relate or demonstrate resilience or sustainable communities. And should we have time, I will also briefly talk about our other non-motorized programs, our bike ped pool or the Delaware Byways program, which has obviously funding or grant opportunities from a non-motorized perspective. Okay, so Transportation Alternatives Program, or TAP. The DelDOT's Transportation Alternatives Program, or TAP, is a federally funded program, but community-driven program that supports the development and construction of non-motorized transportation projects with the goal of providing safe, reliable, and convenient choices for non-motorized users, such as pedestrian and bicyclists. Now, again, it's going to be a little bit more complex than that in a second, but DelDOT offers this program to provide communities throughout the state opportunities to enhance and bolster themselves by implementing long-term visions and plans for safer and more accessible pedestrian and bicycle traffic and other project measures that qualify under a TAP project, which we'll go over, through the creation of visual cues, bike lanes, wider walkways, crosswalks, ADA accessibility, and more. So basically from the bullets, again, it is a federally funded program through our good folks from Federal Highway Administration. The funding we get, I'll just jump to the third bullet, at least within the TAP program, we get about $2.8 million per federal fiscal year. There's also a state fund, about $715,000. And there is some carryover for the money that we don't utilize per fiscal year. But the fiscal year money needs to first be used under the federal before we tap into the additional states. All right, so we're still determining the transportation bill or the other Infrastructure and Jobs Act dedications. So affecting the TAP program, we're still in the learning process of trying to see how that may impact. Hopefully it's going to better improve that 2.8 million federal fiscal year. However, within that, so let me just say Newcastle County receives about close to half of our federal fiscal year budget and state for projects in Newcastle County. The TAP projects are first authorized by WMAPCO, or the MPO for Newcastle County, which we'll get into a little bit later. And again, it's about half the overall budget. Within the TAP program, there's also a recreational trails program, Mike, your program, which is separate. The money goes directly from the feds to really DENREC, or we help manage it with you all, at least Mike, your section, for rec projects. And that's separate from the 2.8. Within DelDOT, each TAP project, we typically try to cap it at $1 million, but one could overmatch. The projects can be phased, but DelDOT intends to discourage this and will establish logical termini and limits. Again, we'll get into the type of projects, but Safe Routes to School is typically a program which is under state law right now as $125,000 max. And most of all, TAP is community driven. It should be based on community-based initiatives. So here are the type of qualifier or the TAP pool projects that qualify. Multimodal improvements are non-motorized for surface transportation purposes and not recreation. That is basically shared use paths. There is Safe Routes to School programs. There are community improvements such as streetscapes. There are scenic overlooks. There's stormwater management, landscaping or vegetation control management. There's the recreational trails, which I had mentioned before. It's DENREC managed. There's grants, but we look for TAP projects under the Scenic and Historic Delaware Byways program and other pedestrian and bike safety, but not necessarily for educational needs. Again, TAP is community driven. So we're at a resilience conference here. I will say that resilience improvements are eligible under TAP. And yes, it all depends. There is eligibility activities that FHWA provides, which I won't get into today, but just to let you know that resilient type projects are a qualifier for FHWA and the type of TAP projects, which again, you'll probably see a couple of examples today. In the case of vegetation management or vegetation control, this includes practices in transportation right-of-ways to improve roadway safety, as well as actions to prevent against invasive species and provide erosion control. What is not eligible are that funds cannot be used for the following activities because there is no authorization under the Federal Highway Program. That is for state or MPO administrative purposes, promotional activities, except permitted under Safe Routes to School, routine maintenance and operations, except trail maintenance as permitted under the Recreational Trails Program. And what also doesn't qualify is general recreation of park facilities, playground equipment, sports fields, campgrounds, picnic areas, or pavilions, etc. So what is needed for a TAP project? This is probably the most important aspect, at least for the audience that's out there. You must have a public agency sponsor that might include local governments, natural resource or qualified land use agencies, nonprofits responsible for administration of local and recognized transportation safety programs, and school districts, which are basically state operated. They must be community driven. That is really whose project idea is this? And like the other speakers had presented, there is a 20% non-federal cash match that is required, and that's broken between design and construction phases. You cannot use other federal matches with federal funds under TAP. And the effort must be dedicated or intended for public use. And right-of-way or easement donations are basically, they're going to be required for free, or we're going to ask for the donations. So I didn't cover everything. So let me tell you all the other eligibility. There is transit agencies are eligible. In this case, it's probably our DART groups. They include the agency responsible for public transportation that is determined by the Federal Transit Administration. School districts, they include, like I mentioned, they include local education agencies or specific schools and may not include public or nonprofit private schools. Projects should benefit the general public and not only a private entity. And folks that may apply for a TAP project, unfortunately, DelDOT or the MPOs are not eligible as sponsors. However, the state DOTs and MPOs, or any other nonprofit for that matter, since I know that there's many, may and are encouraged to partner with an eligible entity as a project sponsor to carry out the eligible project. Okay, so the process to apply for a TAP project. I might have mentioned, if not, I'm mentioning it now. Newcastle County, the projects are first vetted or applied through the MPO, that is WillMapGo. They typically put out a call for projects. In Kent and Sussex, it is DelDOT's responsibility. It's myself and our section. Apply anytime. We don't necessarily list it by calendar year. Our section will obviously work with the MPO with a list of projects and the sponsor. But we really like things identified within a comp plan or a master plan. If there's any specific questions, our section is certainly more than happy to pre-screen the proposed project with the applicant or some of the ideas, the size of the project. We're willing to sit and talk to city council or town council members and introduce the program so they understand what the obligations are. We can also provide information on match and funding questions, and of course, anything else. So if there's an interest in applying in a TAP project in Kent or Sussex, it comes directly to me or our section, as mentioned. A letter of interest from the sponsor should come, snail mail or email, doesn't really matter. And Billy basically described the project, the ability to supply the match, and map the project limits. And again, we're really here for you and not just for ourselves. So we're willing to meet with you and go over things. Okay, so the planning process. So this is kind of a lengthy process. So let me try to go through this as quickly as possible. So when we receive a TAP application, and again, these slides, which will be provided by Mike's group or the RASCL, they have tons of links that right here is the application link for TAP. And there's other useful links as well. So when you receive the slides, you'll have all the information. So when we receive a TAP submission, we are going to first pre-screen application and advise the applicant or sponsor or WMAPCO. Much of the project selection or selection process also goes into programming things financially and scheduling all projects according to those finances and budgets of what we currently have. So if you are rejected, please don't give up on a TAP application. Keep applying. Right now, we have about a dozen projects currently in active process in different stages, and we have 3 that are accepted, but basically are undetermined with a status quo. Depending on the number of active projects being backlogged, scheduling, and their anticipated cost, our section or DelDOT, we can entertain about 3 to 6 new projects per year. Right now, however, we are somewhat backlogged with most of them at their initial concept planning stage. TAP projects such as sidewalks, streetscaping, and bicycle lanes are individually looked upon and judged in an 8 criteria index developed by DelDOT and similar to the WMAPCO prioritization. The criteria awards points on a proposed project's proximity to pedestrian and bicycle generating activities, its support for redevelopment, social equity, and overall potential use and value. The review criteria are mostly quantitative, although some of the additional measures are judged quantitatively. A select group of professionals from DelDOT's Division of Planning, that is my section, which I have to give a shout out to Todd, Chip, and Kelly, review and evaluate all eligible TAP applications received. Projects are then ranked and can receive up to 22 points. A call for applications is accepted on a yearly basis, but as I mentioned before, we have not necessarily undertaken this process for the last several years. A TAP application submission is always required, although DelDOT is not necessarily filling out the application. If there's definitely questions in terms of the application process, we're here to address that. If and when the 8 criteria index is used, proposed projects are given a final technical score. The final project list is based on a technical score, cost effectiveness, and other factors. Some scoring factors to consider are location and support assistance to bus stops, access connections to community centers, including libraries, schools, parks, bike routes, and greenways. We also take into account strategies for state spending, transportation equity, and ADA access, safety, and finally, the degree of non-motorized gap connections and mobility that the project location may serve. We also strongly consider following the following quantitative or other special factors as defined in our application or in reviewing these applications as received or prioritized by WMAPCO. So specifically, here's a number of other considerations that we take into account for the TAP application. Has the proposed project already been identified, listed, or applied to an overall master planning or comprehensive plan? This initial effort, usually done by others, is typically adopted and recognized by municipalities, county departments, and other state agencies or nonprofits as part of an organized upfront program and effort. So we really want you to describe those efforts up front and provide us that information to justify why your TAP project is simply not a random wish list to really appease a few constituents. Describe any work phases, efforts, or outreach that are currently underway or have been completed. Have any public information or community meetings been held? Describe this, and remember, our staff may verify that in terms of the community outreach already taken place. Are adjacent property owners aware and in support of this project? Please provide us that information. So really, with that being said, the three project killers or the deflators that really disqualify a TAP project are really the adjacent property owners and whether or not they're willing to donate the real estate or the right of way or the easements. Really, if TAP is community-driven projects submitted by, a community itself, then why would folks want to be compensated on top of that? That's really not our objective. The second component, which really disqualifies things, are really the utilities that may be in the way. Again, that's above ground or below. So really, the point that disqualifies that is that basically becomes the project rather than the TAP project. It's really a cost factor behind everything. And then ultimately,
we're about
go ahead,
time.
Mike.
Do you
Okay.
finish up there for us?
Yep. And then who will take over the proposed ownership and maintenance responsibilities? So if the TAP project meets all the requirements, we will typically place the project in the queue for the next available round of funding and programming for it. All right, so I have a couple examples right here, if I don't mind going over. This is Seaford. This is master planning efforts. This is before and after. This is kind of the concept planning. This is the visualizations. This is it. And with this project, there's actually a number of rain gardens and biofiltration swales, which were included. And here's the planning process. The development takes about a year. Design, which is engineering, 18 to 24 months. And then construction of your TAP project is typically 6 months to a year. It's essentially a turnkey effort with DelDOT managing and administrating everything. But we really do look upon the sponsor for outreach assistance in any public outreach, or if there's issues with property owners with a little hesitations. And plans are always built to design for DelDOT specifications and DelDOT advertisement. We basically have eliminated, if not moved away from sponsored administered type projects. So here's just another example before and after. There's our scenic overlooks. Here's our streetscapes. This is a byway grant. This is a scenic overlook at the Ashton track. Environmental mitigation. I know that was talked. That's a qualifier for TAP. There's soil erosion controls, detention and sediment basins. And again, the projects must be related to surface transportation. So here's an example on Delaware Avenue, which we've done over the years. This is a biofiltration and rain garden. These are the type of projects of what we're looking for. So again, just a close-up of it, but that's the final product, at least in one of them. So again, there is a surface transportation component behind the water quality or stormwater management. That is improved streetscapes, sidewalks, and water control pollutions behind it. Here's the Anchorage Pond, which was another example right by Sea Colony, down by the beach area. This is a stormwater management pond. This is a grassy area that was then converted. There's a walkability component since we removed this slip ramp, if you can see this right here. And then we put in a shared use path. We tightened up a little bit more pavement, but this is another example of the biofiltration swales. Again, a TAP qualifier project, which we worked for the Delaware Center for Inland Bays. I believe that they were the sponsor. I think they were the sponsor. And construction of this, I'll get this, was about $677,000. So that's an affordable project when you actually look at our TAP qualifiers to try and keep projects under $1 million. We have permeable sidewalks. This is in Lewis. So we can do that. We certainly look for those opportunities. These are the examples of what we're looking for resiliency and sustainability. Some of these rain gardens, again, the largest issue might be utilities and or maintenance of them. There's cross-section of everything. And here's just another couple of examples of what we're looking for. This is not in Delaware, but these are some of the things that we're looking for under the TAP program if we're talking about resiliency and sustainability. So lastly is our byway program coming in for grants. So again, not everything has been approved, but from what we hear through the woodwork is some of the byway grants and are coming back, which is within the TAP program, but it's a separate grant funding objective. It's not out of that $2.8 million, which I mentioned before. So those applications should be coming through FHWA, we're going to endorse it, but we'd really like to see projects that actually have something on the ground with the with the byways program. So really, we want to undertake TAP-like projects. And there's our website. There's the application process. And believe it or not, the University of Delaware Complete Communities has a really good website of useful information, which talk about our programs, as well as others throughout the state. So Mike, sorry I went over the allotted time, but I am complete.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate the effort and the amount of information you're sharing. We are actually just over our time for today's session. So I do want to thank all of the attendees. I did see that we didn't have any questions that have not been answered in the Q&A. So I realize that it's okay that we went a little bit over and we didn't have a whole lot of time for questions because I didn't have a lot of them in the chat. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. I do want to let you know that if you have questions that come to you, please feel free to reach out to us at RASCL. We're going to have all the contact information as well for our speakers, and we will reach out to them as well if there are things that you know we hear or that we're finding are larger questions or concerns, and we'll hopefully be able to follow up and get answers for you if we do have those. So yes, I would like to thank all of our speakers today. Great presentations, not many questions. So I'm hoping that means that people were really taking away what they needed to out of the presentations. So I appreciate your time and appreciation of the guests that came, the visitors, to hear the presentations. I do want to let you know that we are first day in. We have 2 more sessions coming up tomorrow. First one's at 10:30 a.m. on innovative funding, and followed up at 3 o'clock with local stories, which is always a hit with our audience. So I hope you can stay for those, and then we will have a half an hour of what's called a RASCL Summit Lounge. So that's our virtual happy hour, I guess you could say. So I hope you can join us for that. And again, thank you to all of our sponsors and our panelists. Hope you have a nice day.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.